Hello, hello. My name is Belinda. I'm an astrologer based in Los Angeles, and I specialize in evolutionary astrology. So we're going to be talking about some fun celestial energies. I'm joined today by Nicole.
Hi there, I am Nicole. I am a tarot and ritual guide, and I use tarot and ritual to help my clients find more clarity in their lives and become more whole and integrated.
Amazing. So we are collaborating on this really interesting intersection of astrology and tarot, and it's helping us enrich our understanding of the energies that we're feeling. Astrology, speaking of the celestial bodies and the energies that are affecting everyone as a collective and everyone individually. And then tarot is bringing this amazing insight with imagery, with different archetypes, and really helping us understand to a fuller picture what's happening with astrology, right?
Right, yeah. So each of the major arcana cards is linked to a planet or zodiac sign. So that's why they are able to really deepen our understanding of what it means when a planet is in a house or a sign, and how that's affecting us on an unconscious level and a conscious level.
Yeah. So today we're bringing to light some of the energy that's happening with the new moon in Gemini. And it is going to be the new moon, specifically on Saturday, the 17th, June 17th at 9:40 p.m. Pacific time in Los Angeles. And so we're talking about this. Today is June 14th. And the moon is very interesting because the moon is the fastest moving planet that we have in astrology. It stays in a sign for 2 to 3 days. And so it's entering Gemini tomorrow, and it'll be there from the 15th through the 18th, with the new moon happening on the 17th. Okay. So with this quick moving planet, there's so many things to speak about with the moon. And so when we're talking about the new moon in Gemini, we kind of have three elements to that, right? We have the moon, which is the planet. We have the new moon, which is the phase that the moon is in. So the moon can be a new moon, it can be a full moon, it could be a quarter moon, waxing, waning. These are all relationships that the moon has with the sun. And because it reflects the sun's light, it creates different phases of light for the moon, okay? And then the third element that we're speaking of is the zodiac sign that it's in, which is Gemini. So with that in mind, when we speak about the moon in its phase of new moon, there's this energy of kind of a ready mode, right? Things are about to happen. It's the beginning of a cycle. And so when the moon enters into its new moon phase, the mind and the body are really recharged for the month. Something's about to happen. Manifestation's about to begin. And it can also be akin to the maiden phase if you know the tri-phases of maiden, mother, and crone. It's the beginning phase, the youth phase. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Nicole?
Well, yeah. So the high priestess is who represents the moon in the tarot, and the high priestess, she has this duality about her. So you're right there, and it's very she represents the cycles of life, the beginnings, the endings. And so yes, for the new moon in this case, the high priestess is really representing beginnings, an opening, a portal of something that we're going to be exposed to. And because it's the moon, it's typically going to be something that's in our unconscious. And that's even more so because it's a new moon, right? It's the dark moon. So we're going to be diving into, we've got a portal to looking at something in our subconscious.
Yeah. I'm going to share this little graphic that I have of the moon symbol and Gemini symbol. So just like Nicole was saying, the moon being a part of sort of the unconscious, right? And with the new moon, it being the start of something. When you're thinking about the moon in astrology, you're thinking a lot about the emotional landscape. You're thinking a lot about what's happening underneath, that's shifting, that's cyclical, right? The sun is a little bit more of a stable force. It's a constant source of light, whereas the moon waxes and wanes. It changes, it turns away from the earth, it revolves around the earth, and it rotates. So there's this changeability, this flow, and this wave with the moon that's very akin to a lot of feminine energy, if we're thinking about, not in a genderized way, more so in a receptive or directive sort of way with energy. The moon is receiving the light from the sun. And so when we think about the moon in Gemini, the Gemini energy is a very, very fast moving energy. Okay, and the ruler of Gemini is Mercury. So if you're thinking about the energy of Mercury, it is known as the messenger, right? So it's all about communication. Gemini is an air energy, so communication happens via speaking. There's a lot of throat chakra that's activated during this time. Communication can also happen via writing. And Gemini is also represented by a lot of duality. And so when you're thinking about duality, you're thinking a lot about paradox as well. Two opposing sides that seem to hold the same space and are not contradicting each other, but rather exist in totality, right? Nicole, do you want to go more in depth with that?
Yeah. So I will just talk about the Lovers card here. It really does represent that duality that you were talking about. So this is the card for Gemini in the tarot. And as you can see here, we've got two figures, one that looks male, one that looks female. And so again, it's that duality of the masculine and feminine. We can also see there's an angel on here. So there's this duality between the human and the divine. And so this card is all about, like, how do we create this union of opposite energies? How do we hold space for paradox, like you were talking about? And so, yeah, it's really interesting that we've got this new moon in this energy. It's almost as if it's opening up this portal for us to look at our own duality. And because it's a new moon, sort of this dark moon, it may be a part of us that we're not really interested in looking at, or that maybe we've been avoiding looking at. But this new moon is an opportunity to get to know that part of ourselves better, because when we open ourselves up to that duality, when we open ourselves up to holding space for paradox, we ourselves can become more integrated in our energies.
I love that so much. The sense of integration that's from holding space with the duality. And when you're thinking about Gemini and that sort of duality as well, and bringing in the idea that Mercury is coming in with communication, sometimes it can manifest itself as oscillating between like introversion and extroversion. So the more introverted side of Gemini is the side that really is curious, that really wants to learn more. So that's the side that maybe you're gonna break open a book and spend some time by yourself studying something because you just want to learn more about something or about yourself. And then the other side of Gemini, that's the more extroverted side, is the communication side, getting together with your friends and chatting or sharing what you've learned, writing things down, starting a blog, whatever it is. That's the more extroverted side of Gemini. And so the integration of the two is, you're taking something that you're learning, that you're discovering, and you're sharing that with the world. So there is a inward and outward sort of integration that's happening. I think with the new moon and the phase, because it's the beginning of this process, I think like leaning into that curiosity, leaning into right now is the time to ask questions, right? If something is really sort of just intriguing you, or if there's something inside of you that just feels a little bit out of place, to kind of open up the space to ask why. Why am I feeling this way? Where is this coming from? And really examining feelings during this time, which is really connected to the moon, right?
Yeah, I really love what you're saying. Yeah. And I just wanted to add, there's this sense that when we create space for both of the, like our tendency to be introverted or extroverted, whichever your tendency is, when we open up space for the other one, we realize there's more to us, and we don't have to cling to an identity like, oh, I'm just an introvert. I'm going to do my own research, but I'm not going to talk about it to anyone. And you can do that. But what this new moon is doing is offering us an opportunity to explore, well, what if I do share what I've been learning about? Or maybe if you're an extrovert, it's, what would happen if I did get more curious about my intuition on this matter, rather than looking outside of myself to get more information. And so we create this space where we're not pining or clinging to one or the other. We can appreciate both of these qualities within ourselves, the tendency to be an introvert or an extrovert.
Yeah. I think also to add another layer of duality into this space too, when we're comparing Gemini and the moon, or rather Mercury and the moon, Mercury and Gemini is a very left brain sort of activity. So Gemini, you're really thinking about like a lot of the logic, a lot of the facts. That's where the learning kind of leans into, right? And then the moon is more of like the emotional sphere. And so then how do we bring both of those together? And right now is a really great time for emotional processing. And what I really mean by that is taking the time to intellectually understand your emotions, being able to put names to things. Emotional intelligence hinges upon you being able to name the emotions that you're experiencing and that you're feeling, right? And so being able to understand that for yourself, what you're going through, and at the same time, not over intellectualizing things so that you are completely dissociated from your experience, but being able to feel things fully, and also being able to understand things on a cognitive level, and then being able to talk about it. So maybe that means that this time is really potent for you to get together with your therapist, or maybe it's a really great time for you to journal, or maybe it's a really great time for you to get together with a friend and talk about some things that maybe it might have felt like there was an emotional blockage before, or something that you would just like to share with someone. That's what this is kind of looking like to me at this moment.
Yeah. And, since you're talking about Mercury, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the card that represents Mercury, and that is the Magician. And so the Magician is this archetype that really is about our understanding how to use our will to create what we want for ourselves in this life. And so you can see the Magician is a little more dynamic than the High Priestess. So there is that sort of that duality there. Whereas the High Priestess is sitting with her intuition and being still and observing. The Magician has got his tools. He's making things happen. And so he's more about that creative power. And I feel like it's a really supportive energy right now, in terms of, it's how do we, basically it's, you have the tools that you need to create more space in your life for this duality, for this both and rather than either or. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Nicole, I love that we have these cards and that you're able to just bring that into this space and talk about Mercury in that way, because it adds so much depth to that. And I completely agree with you. It's very supportive during this time. And if, let me see, I'm actually going to bring up the chart that is happening during this new moon. And this might not mean anything to some of you all who have never read a chart, a natal wheel, or a chart of the time. But what's happening with Mercury is actually here. So we're looking over here. This is Gemini. And Mercury is over here with the sun and the moon. And so Mercury, which rules Gemini, is in its home sign. So Mercury feels so at home here. It's supporting what's happening with the new moon in Gemini. So you're so spot on with that. The Magician is a powerful card too.
It really is. I mean, it's so much about just believing in the power of your own magic and realizing that you have everything you need to create that magic in your life, just to be creative. So a lot of what the Magician is about is learning how to believe in yourself.
Yeah. And even looking at those two cards right next to each other, the High Priestess and the Magician, you can see some of the duality that's already happening just within that energy, right?
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
supporting.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to bop back to the chart of the new moon and just point out one other thing that's happening with this new moon, which is, you know, when we're thinking about what's happening in the sky, and we're talking about the moon right now, and we're talking a little bit about Mercury, but, you know, there's a ton of other things that are happening in the sky at the same time. We've just decided, hey, we're going to focus on this moon. So what also happens in the chart is there are relationships that end up happening amongst all the planets when something's happening. So when we're talking about the moon and the relationships that are happening around the moon during this new moon time, not only are there Sun and Mercury here in Gemini with it, but we have something really interesting happening with the moon and Neptune. And so Neptune is currently in Pisces, and it's squaring the new moon. So what that means when you have planets that are squaring each other is basically they're having a conversation with each other, and the square is basically a very tense conversation. That's the kind of energetic conversations the moon and Neptune are having. And so with this square that's happening during this time, it's adding an additional color to the situation. Not only are we thinking about the moon in Gemini, but now we're thinking about how Neptune is influencing it. And Neptune can be prone to daydreaming, especially in Pisces. Oh my gosh, it is very, very prone to dissolving into fantasy. And so what that can mean for this moon, which is a moon that it has to do with your emotional sphere, sometimes you might have a lot of thoughts, Gemini, that are coming through very quickly as Gemini does it happens to bring. And then Neptune is coloring it with a lot of things that maybe are not necessarily the truth. Okay. And so when that happens, when the lines between reality and fantasy are blurred, it's going to be really important during this time to let a lot of things go, right? And not take everything that comes through very seriously. Which is very akin to like the Gemini energy. You want to just let the movement come. Gemini and Pisces are mutable signs, which just basically means that things need to flow. You might feel an inclination to disconnect from reality during this time, and how that can manifest is if there are certain vices like activities or drinking, whatever it is, those kinds of activities might feel a little bit more attractive during this time to go into the fantasy land, to disconnect. You might also be very prone or sensitive to subconscious and environmental influences. So what that really means is you're really open and susceptible during this time. So it's going to be really important for you to understand that things that are coming through, messages that are coming through, downloads that are coming through, even in your own emotions that are washing through you might not be yours. So there's just a little bit of lack of clarity during this time as well. Is there anything coming through for you, Nicole?
Wow. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So Neptune represented in the tarot is a pretty interesting card. It's the Hanged Man, and you can see he's pretty vulnerable and susceptible, as you were talking about. And the Hanged Man usually represents this idea that sometimes we have to sacrifice something in order to stay aligned with our values. And so that's a really interesting energy compared to the moon. One thing that is very similar about them is that they're like, we got to pay attention, right? Where there's the high priestess is sitting still, and the Hanged Man has no choice but to be still. Like he's suspended. And so there's not much when we're in this position where we're suspended. It's really a time for us to be very present with what's happening. Because there usually is something when we are being very present, there is something that we can see that maybe is out of alignment with our values and that we may need to give up in order for us to stay aligned with our values.
Yes, I think the word that's coming to mind right now is discernment. And
yes, perfect.
Because there's just going to be a lot of fast moving energy during the next few days, and a lot of emotional energy too. And so being able to stay present is going to be really important. It's going to be very easy to feel swept away during this time. And so being able to understand that things will pass, to understand that your emotions will flow, and that something that's coming into mind right now is we can get so easily identified with our emotions, right? If you've ever been in a space where you felt, let's say, depressed, and when you're in that moment, it can feel like this is going to last forever, right? And we get very identified and attached to our emotions. Or on the opposite spectrum of things, when we're experiencing a really high joy, love, passion, to feel very enraptured in that moment, and to understand that there is an impermanence to everything that is also a relief, right? That things will move, and nothing will quite, emotions will always change. And I think that's the sort of perspective that's happening during this time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about how the Hanged Man is also about this idea of surrendering to the moment. And it's okay to not have to control your emotions or be swept away, but just be with them, surrender to them, not in a way that you're getting swept away, but in the sense that, okay, this is what needs to come through. I need to feel these emotions right now, and I know they will pass. So I'm just going to surrender to what is coming through right now, because that is part of what's going on with the Hanged Man. He's got this halo around him because it's this ability to sacrifice or surrender that allows him to be on his spiritual path.
Yes. Some key phrases that are coming up: don't get stuck, let things flow, let things go. Right? I think in terms of, if you do decide that the next 2 days are a great time for you to journal, I think some great prompts during this time would be, because the energies are moving and moving in a way that feel very quick, it's going to be really important for you to figure out for yourself what is your constant, right? Where do you feel most centered and grounded? Because you're going to want to always come back to that as emotions pass through, as things come and go in the next few days. What makes you feel the most like you, right?
Yeah. I love that. And, I also want to kind of bring it back to the fact that this is happening, or the moon is in Gemini. So I'm wondering if there is something going on here in terms of understanding how to work with our duality and sacrificing this idea, or this idea that we have to be identified with one side of the coin or the other.
Yes.
Yeah. And so
there's a
just
lot of vulnerability that's happening during this time, right?
Yeah. Whenever you see naked people in the tarot, like you do with the Lovers, there is a lot of vulnerability going on. And of course, the Hanged Man, just because of the position he's in, he is also very vulnerable. So I think it would be really interesting, as an exercise during this time, to create conversations between the two parts of your duality, like the part of you that really wants to be in a relationship, and the other part of you that is like, no way, I just want to be independent right now and I don't want to get involved, or whatever the duality is that's arising in you in this moment.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Really contemplating on the duality, the paradox of yourself and your own energy, and how you can begin the process of integration, and holding space for all of that. Yes to all of that. Okay, I'm going to bop back on just before we delve into the next section, because we've been talking for just a little bit now. And, Nicole and I are offering sessions that are a combination of the astrology and tarot, which is super exciting, because we feel like it creates a bigger picture, a fuller picture of you and your energies. And additionally, both Nicole and I do separate consultations and coachings so that we can delve more into the astrology and delve more into the tarot and our other tools and modalities that we have. And we thought it would be really cool to, in addition to just talking about the general energies of this time, which that was a lot of information. There was a lot to process right there. But just kind of giving a sneak peek into how Nicole and I work together on a specific chart for a specific person, right? Because right now, all we're really talking about is the general energy that's in the air, that maybe it might resonate with you, with some a little stronger, with some people, maybe they might not feel that as potently, right? And why is that? Why do only some of us feel some of these energies and some of us don't? Like if you've ever read your horoscope and just kind of felt like, wow, that's really just not me. It's because your own chart is much more complex than that, right? And then how the energies outside of us are affecting our chart is very specific, very individual. So we thought that maybe we would talk a little bit about how this new moon energy is affecting both of our charts, each of our charts, and just to get a little sneak peek of what it would be like if you were working with us and we were talking about these transits for you specifically. So this is a fun little activity that we're about to delve into. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to bring up Nicole's chart. And like I mentioned before, it might not mean anything to you, but I'm going to point out a few things of what the new moon in Gemini is activating for her. Okay. So let me just pop her chart up here. Okay. So here we have Nicole's chart. And so this new moon is over here. This is where Gemini is for her, okay? And so we see the sun over here, we see Mercury over here as well, and then we can see there aren't any planets over here. So what that means is there isn't a concentration of energy. Now, does it still affect Nicole? 100%. As you can see, she has all 12 of the zodiac signs in her chart, as we all do. So no matter what, we're affected by what's happening. What this chart is telling me specifically is where in her life she's going to feel this energy. So she has it in the 11th house. So the 11th house is the house of friends, of community, of goals. And so what this could signify during this time for her is this need to learn more and communicate, and this emotional space that's opening up for her during this time. It could be a really great time for her to have conversations with friends. There might be some tension that's eased right now, where she feels like she can speak her truth more freely with her friends, that she feels a little bit more open to express herself or receive from those conversations. So that's what that means in the 11th house. So for her, it's going to be more of a social energy. So maybe less of the emotional processing on her own, which of course is always necessary, but the Gemini energy is going to show up more in relation to other people. So maybe that means getting in contact with the communities that you're a part of, or maybe that means scheduling a coffee date with someone that you've wanted to catch up with for a while. That's how that energy is going to manifest for her, okay? And then I'm going to bring one more interesting tidbit into this when we're talking about transits in someone's chart. So like I said, there aren't any planets here for Nicole, but because I can read her chart, I can see that it is activating another part of her chart, which is over here, okay? And so this new moon in Gemini is actually activating for her Pluto in Virgo in her second house, okay? So what that really means, and when it's squaring her natal Pluto, what could happen during this time is some things from the shadow, some emotions from the shadow could be brought up. And so when you're talking about Pluto, you're talking a lot about confrontation. So there's going to be kind of this duality right now of confrontation, perhaps outwardly and inwardly. And so emotions might manifest in a way that if she is not awake enough or aware enough, it could manifest in a way that could be a little bit more compulsive, that could be a little bit more manipulative. And so it's going to be really important in this time to just be really conscious of those patterns. If it feels like it's a pattern that's coming up, oh, these are old feelings, or this is a habit that I've been trying to break, but I'm noticing it's surfacing during this time. That's an additional layer that's being activated for Nicole during this time. The last thing I want to say before I turn this over to Nicole, who's going to be bringing in a card to talk about her chart, which I just want to say it's always difficult to talk about your own energies and your own chart. So the last thing I want to say is, in addition to feeling maybe more of an energy to connect with people during this time for you, Nicole, it's also going to be a really potent time for you to re-examine the goals in your life. So taking the time to see, are you in alignment with the goals that you've set out for yourself, or do you need to reassess your goals and amend those goals for yourself, or do you need to amend the path that you're on to realign with those goals? And to really prioritize during this time your need to be in community, the need to be a part of that social energy. So that's what's coming in for your chart as I'm going through this.
That is fascinating. So for Pluto in the tarot, it's represented by this card of Judgment. So as I was talking about earlier with the High Priestess, as in the new moon phase, it's really about this opening or this portal to look at something that is more in the unconscious, something we're not really aware of or that we may be avoiding. But because it's squaring Pluto, or this judgment card, what's really going to be activated is this opening. And this, so judgment is really about waking up to a part of yourself that you may not have even known was there. So you can see there's this angel on here waking up these people from the dead. So this is really a part of themselves that they're being awakened to, that they had, that they weren't even aware of. And so this new moon isn't just going to be a portal. It's probably going to be a pretty strong awakening for me in some sense. And again, because there's naked people here, just like there's in the Lovers, it looks like it's going to be a really vulnerable time for me.
Yeah.
However, I will say what I love about judgment is that, as frightening as it can be to wake up to a part of yourself that you weren't even aware of, it's making you more whole, and that's beautiful. You're getting access to more of who you are, and with in Gemini, you're also like figuring out how to integrate that, because that's what the Lovers is. It's that union of opposites. So yeah, it looks like it's going to be maybe a bit of a rude awakening, but it's also in the long run a really supportive energy for my long-term spiritual journey.
Absolutely. I'm so happy that you're able to see that, because Pluto, you're so right. When we open the door and we have access to that sort of underworld that Pluto provides, it is an immense opportunity for healing. We can't heal anything that we don't have access to, right?
Yes,
so when that gate is open, when that portal is open, it's an opportunity, even if it's uncomfortable in the moment, which healing absolutely is uncomfortable, right?
Yes.
But it's the only way we can access the magician, right? To transmute that energy, to really like alchemize, turn lead into gold. And that's what happens with Pluto. Yeah. Amazing. So fun to be able to read your chart. Okay, so we're gonna bring my chart quickly into this space, and it's going to show you how different it is, how this new moon energy is really going to affect both Nicole and I, because I do happen to have quite a bit that's happening in terms of what is happening in Gemini for me. So as you can already see, even if you don't understand how to read a natal chart, you can already see things look a little bit different from my chart to her chart, right? And so what's happening for Gemini for me is I have my natal moon here. So I'm having the moon come in contact again with my own natal moon in the second house. And here I have Chiron. And so what's happening here is, because I have the Gemini moon, new moon, transiting my natal moon, there's a lot of emotional energy here for me. There's a lot that's been magnified here for me. Because this is my natal chart also, and my natal moon is in the second house, and it's in Gemini, what I can share with you is that the second house is represented by resources and what is most valuable to you. Okay, and so because I have Gemini over my second house, for me, knowledge is a really potent resource. And because I have my moon there, that means that my emotional knowledge, being able to understand my emotions and communicate about my emotional landscape, is very important to me. And I am like I'm always down to have a conversation to process things. And I'm always journaling. I love therapy. I love getting together and having one-on-one conversations with my friends and delving in deep. That's who I am. And so with the new moon kind of transiting all of this space, that's going to be even more heightened during this time. Okay, so I mentioned that there's a lot that's happening for me, not just because I have my natal moon here, but my natal moon aspects a lot of other things in my chart, which just basically means it has relationships to a lot of other planets in my own chart. And so because this transiting moon is activating my natal moon, it's activating all those other relationships. And if you can see just right across the way, is all of this. And this is all of my Sagittarius energy. So basically it's activating what is called an opposition that's happening all in my 8th house. And I just want to let you all know 8th house stuff is not easy. And I told Nicole before this session, I believe that anyone who has planets, placements in your 8th house, therapy is your best friend to understand, because what happens when you have a lot of planets in your 8th house is you are really tapped into the psychic energy of unresolved trauma. And so what could happen during this time is there could be a lot of stuff that's brought up for me as well. Similar to you, Nicole, Pluto has an opportunity for that. The 8th house is also associated with Pluto. So all of that's going to be activated. And I'm not going to talk about all of these planets that it's going to be activating. I'm going to focus specifically on Uranus because it's going to be in direct opposition to the new moon in Gemini. And so when we talk about Uranus and when Uranus is activated, Uranus has this energy that is very, very unpredictable. And what that could mean is in relationship to my moon, emotions could be very excitable. Emotions could be very erratic. There could be a lot of impulsiveness that happens during this time. That could mean I might be more prone to start a fight, which I might say I am feeling a little bit agitated. I'm acknowledging my emotional state that is building during this time. There might be sudden news that might dysregulate me. And there might be this oscillation of extremes with my emotions. And because I can see that this is a transit that's happening for me, that's coming up for me in the next few days, and I actually am feeling it in my body as well, I am afforded this opportunity where I have this awareness, okay, the next few days, things might feel a little emotionally chaotic for me. So what that could mean is any sort of decisions that I might want to make that might not be most aligned for me, maybe a decision that I might not make in my most grounded or centered state, I can have a certain awareness and compassion around that and to understand, hey, right now might not be the time to pull the trigger on something that feels very permanent. Something a few days ago, I almost pulled the trigger on a new apartment and just kind of was like, you know what? I need to sit with this. I need to not make permanent decisions right now from this space where there's a lot of emotional energy. So that's what's really amazing about just knowing all of this. I, of course, am human and have to feel all of the emotions that are happening and the chaos that's happening. And also I can understand, hey, maybe wait a week, see how I feel next week before I do anything that is too impulsive, right?
Yeah, I love how you're talking about this, how the astrology and the tarot can really offer you some information that you otherwise wouldn't have, that's going to support you in the long term rather than just being reactive, because you're able to see how these energies are at work right now. And if you just wait a few days, it's going to shift, and you may not make sort of reactive decisions to do something when you have that knowledge. So I want to talk a little bit about Uranus too. So Uranus is represented by the Fool. And so this is in opposition to the moon right now. So you've got, or in your chart. And so the Fool, you can see just looking at the two of these, they are very different energies, whereas the High Priestess is very still contemplative. We've got the Fool who's not thinking about anything, not contemplating anything, and just in very risky behavior. He is all about, moving according to your instincts, taking big risks. And sometimes that's a good thing to have in our lives. But that's just the energy that's coming in for you right now in opposition to this. So I can see what you're talking about. There may be this tendency to, it almost seems like there is this sort of conflict within, because there may be this tendency to want to do something risky right now. But because you have this awareness, you're not going to do that. You're going to do your best not to do that, because you know that you can just sit with this energy. You can sit and observe it. You can wait a few days even, and some of that is going to pass, and you can make a decision that's more aligned with your entire life, not just your life that day.
100%. I love that. Risky behavior is definitely the energy that I'm sensing with all of that. And, this really gives us an opportunity to talk about our own experiences, like everything that we feel, like we're not disregarding it, right? I'm going to find a way to channel that energy into a space that might feel a little bit more productive or a little bit more aligned. I'm not going to be immune to that experience at all. It doesn't mean I'm not going to feel that. Just because I have the knowledge of this doesn't mean that I am completely invincible.
Right.
But it's going to be able to guide my decisions in a manner where I feel like, okay, risky behavior, maybe that means I'm just going to be spontaneous and take a day trip down to San Diego or something, versus making a life decision for myself that will have long lasting effects, right?
Right. Yeah. So making choices that are healthier rather than simply reactive, and using that in your energy to make healthier choices rather than reactive choices.
Exactly. This was a great opportunity for us to really talk about what that could look like for each one of you. And it was really amazing, I think, to be able to delve into both of our charts, because we have very different charts. And so even as we talked about the new moon in Gemini, and then some of the other energies surrounding that with Mercury, with Neptune, that in itself is pretty complex. And then when you map it onto a specific person, there's a whole other level of depth that we can really delve into. And something was very specific to you, Nicole, and something was very specific to me. So I know that was a lot of information. I'm very curious how these energies are going to play out for each one of you, and what sorts of things that you're able to notice and just be able to process during this time. And so feel free to send either one of us a message. If you're connected to us, leave a comment. I'm just very curious how this is specific to each one of you guys. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Nicole?
Yeah, no, I just want to say that I would love to hear what resonated with you, the listener, because everyone's chart is so different. So, but you also know, right? You know yourself, even if you don't know where your planets are exactly, you know yourself. And so I'd be really curious to hear what parts of this resonated with you. Is there something that you're like, oh yeah, I totally get that. I'm going to focus on this. I'd love to hear more about that.
It's so true. You're right. We're all so in tune with ourselves. Like, we know, we can feel these things, even if we don't have the language. We're lucky enough, you and I are lucky enough that we have these tools, tarot and astrology, that we have developed a language to be able to express some of these things that we feel. So as each of you are experiencing this and can get a little bit more specific of like, hey, you know, what they said, this specific thing, like maybe not everything resonated, but maybe this specific thing really, really felt true to you. Take note of that. And see how you can lean more into that knowledge, lean more into expanding that for yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to add, because I am such a big fan of ritual, I think it really helps us process and integrate everything, is regardless of how you felt about some of this, there is an energy around duality and looking at our duality. And so I want to recommend either journaling or even just in your mind having a conversation between the two opposing sides of yourself, like your desire to be an introvert, but you're really an extrovert, or vice versa. So just really sort of thinking about what are the dual parts of you. Is there a dual part of you where you feel very drawn to one side but not the other, and seeing if you can have a conversation with both of those sides to bring a little more integration and just really holding space for that duality.
I love that. And you're so right. Ritual is so important. Journaling is going to be a really powerful tool during this time, leaning into that Gemini Mercury energy.
Yeah.
And, I know a few people who might not connect to writing as much, but voice journaling, creating voice memos for yourself. It doesn't have to be for anyone else. If you don't want to talk to anyone else, you don't have to. Maybe it's not activating a very social part of your chart. Maybe you're feeling much more drawn to that introverted side of it. So talking aloud to yourself, really connecting to the air energy, the air element. You could even take a practice where you are speaking to yourself in front of a mirror. That's always a really interesting activity to do. Mirror work. Talking to yourself in the mirror is really interesting. And then you get an aspect of that duality too. You're talking to yourself and you're having to look at yourself. And also there is this disconnect of, that's me right there.
Yeah.
So that's always interesting.
Cool. I love that.
Great. Okay. Well, we hope that you guys have a really enlightening next few days. I hope that this was able to inform some of the things that you are feeling and experiencing. And yeah, keep us updated. We can't wait to hear what's happening for you. My cat too. Thank you guys.
Bye.